We are very excited to be here today with Ocean Robbins. Now, Ocean Robbins is the co-founder and CEO of the 500,000 plus member Food Revolution Network. He has hosted more than 1 million people in his Food Revolution summits, and he has organized and facilitated hundreds of live seminars, gatherings, and events for more than 200,000 leaders from 65 nations. Ocean is the author of the upcoming book, The 31-Day Food Revolution: Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World. And that book comes out in February of 2019. He also recently launched the Whole Life Club, which is an online program that combines cutting-edge nutrition information, action hour interviews, weekly action of the week videos, recipes, and an online community designed to put you in the driver's seat of your health. In short, Ocean is a powerhouse for change and a true expert with tremendous insight into the power of a plant-based diet for optimal human health, the environment, and for animal welfare. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ocean.
I'm thrilled to be here with you, and honestly thrilled that you're doing what you're doing. I think this topic is so important. We used to have, what we called adult onset diabetes, and that was type 2, and now we don't call it that anymore because kids are getting it, and of course people are living with type 1 as well. And it's one of the most inadequately understood health crises of our times, I think. A lot of people don't even know what it is or how it works, or certainly what's causing it, and more importantly, people don't know what to do about it. And yet, a third of our kids are expected to face it in their lifetimes, and most people are pre-diabetic. Fabulous that you are unearthing the truth and empowering people with the knowledge, and I'm thrilled to be part of it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's start at the top here. How about you tell our audience your personal story about becoming a plant-based eater yourself, and more importantly, a conscious activist in the world of plant-based nutrition. And also, your family has, involvement with the Baskin Robbins, company, fortune, empire.
You could say that we do. Yeah, we do.
So give us the whole story from the top.
Just a wee little bit of it. Yeah. My grandpa started an ice cream company, 31 flavors. And my dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. And he was groomed from early childhood to one day join in running the family company. But when he was in his early 20s, he was offered that chance. And he said no. And he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to, as we jokingly say in our family, follow his own rocky road. And he ended up becoming, years later, a best-selling author writing about food and health. The media called him the rebel without a cone. Here's this would-be ice cream heir who leaves it all behind and becomes a spokesperson for healthy living. The reality is that when my grandpa started Baskin Robbins, there wasn't much known then about the connection between food and health. It was the 1950s, and a lot of the research that we now base our nutritional understanding on hadn't happened yet. And so he was about making people happy. And that time there was chocolate and strawberry and vanilla. And he said, hey, let's have more flavors. So he came up with 31 flavors, and actually over 500 over the years, because they rotated them through and tested out what people liked. Some of the flavors are pretty weird. But I think the concept of making people happy and giving people choice was awesome. The way I look at it, Food 1.0 is about survival. If you can get enough calories to fill your belly, that's success. Food 2.0 is about commerce. It's where we have choice and texture and cuisine and options all over the world. And the consumer is king in a way. But at the end of the day, Food 2.0 is morally bankrupt. And it's produced a food system that is toxic and that is killing us. And we now know that ice cream is primarily made up of sugar and high-fat dairy products, and that those are both associated with a plethora of long-term health problems for human beings. And my grandpa was no exception to that. First of all, his brother-in-law and business partner, Bert Baskin, died of heart disease at the age of 54. And my grandpa wound up himself on death's door at the age of 71. And his doctors told him he didn't have long to live. He faced serious diabetes, as well as heart problems and weight issues. And he was having to take multiple, what he called horse pills every day just to stay alive. And there were massive side effects, and he was pretty miserable, and it was all downhill. But his doctor did something remarkable, which is I gave him a copy of my dad's book, Diet for New America, and said if he wanted to get better, he should read it and follow its advice. So, remarkably enough, my grandpa read it. Now, not the signed copy my dad had given him when it came out, but the copy the doctor gave him. And he followed its advice. He gave up ice cream and sugar. He ate a lot more fruits and vegetables. He cut way down on his meat consumption, and he got results. The kind of results that we predictably see, honestly, in this work, right? He lost 30 pounds. He reversed his heart disease, and he got off all of his diabetes and blood pressure medications, which he no longer needed. He reversed all of his diabetic symptoms, and he ended up living another 19 more healthy years. His golf game even improved 7 strokes. I mean, the man had a new lease on life. And so we've seen in our family what can happen when we eat the standard American diet, as my dad's Uncle Bert did. I never even knew him. He was gone before I was born. But despite being one of the most successful entrepreneurs in U.S. history and having a family he loved, he didn't have his health, and he lost his life. And we've seen what could happen as my grandpa followed that same path, but then he made a change, and he got the results. And so we know from firsthand experience that food matters in a really big way. And now my family's been on a mission for decades. My dad championing it with his multi-million copy best-selling books, and now me helping lead the charge to a new generation with launching Food Revolution Network in 2012. We are standing, we're putting a stake in the ground for an end to the toxic food culture, and for human beings having the freedom and the knowledge needed to make wise choices, because the status quo is a fast track to suffering and sickness and disease. If you die of heart disease or cancer, that might be what's on the death certificate, but the reality is they aren't the cause of death. They're actually the symptom. If you eat the standard American diet, you are predictably going to end up with, if not diabetes, then with heart disease or cancer or Alzheimer's. These impact most people today. And the reality is that all of these are largely preventable with changes in diet.
That's an amazing story. Absolutely incredible story. So you have this background with your family and your father. When did you personally decide, I'm going to continue doing this? What was the spark?
Well, I was inspired by my dad's example from an early age. And honestly, I remember he and I were marathon runners. I ran my first marathon when I was 10. And as I saw my grandpa's health deteriorating, I knew something better was possible. And we valued fitness tremendously in our family. And I knew that food was foundational. So it was kind of in my DNA, I guess you could say, from the get-go. But when my dad's Diet for New America started inspiring millions of people, we received over 50,000 letters, like handwritten letters, back before there was email or websites, from people thanking him for changing their life. And as those letters were pouring in, I mean, he put a little P.O. box address in the back of the book. And before long, we had to reroute to a P.O. drawer because the box was literally filling up every single day. And we had to go wait in line at the post office to get the physical box because the mail wouldn't fit in the P.O. box. And then we got a drawer, and then we got a bigger drawer. And, the response was incredible. And it was all people who were saying, "You freaking saved my life." They were telling their stories and pouring their hearts out. And I don't know how many of those, one can absorb in a lifetime, but I've definitely had my fill. And at a certain point, the plural of anecdotal is data. And at a certain point, when you hear enough of these stories, you realize this stuff is absolutely real. And so it's been in my heart for a long time. I started a nonprofit organization when I was 16 to mobilize my generation. It was called Yes. And we worked with young leaders around the world. And for 20 years, I directed that nonprofit and worked with hundreds of thousands of young people in over 65 countries in live events and workshops and trainings. And our goal was empowering youth to take a stand for a healthy environment and for healthy lives. So we always brought food into it. And as I traveled the globe, I kept seeing that everybody eats and that what we eat is having this huge impact on our health and our lives. And I worked with indigenous leaders in the Amazon who were struggling to save their rainforest homelands from illegal cattle ranching and oil mining. And sometimes the forests were also being cut down for soy plantations and corn to grow livestock feed. And I saw the impact of the American hamburger right there on the survival of my friends Tashka and Laura Yawanawa and their people. I worked with indigenous leaders in the Arctic who were trying to save their homeland in the face of climate change that's disrupting the caribou migration and their ecosystems and threatening their way of life. My friend Yvonne grew up with the Gwich'in tribe, which is 200 miles from the nearest road, but he is impacted as well, and his people's very survival is threatened. And I saw how food was fueling the climate crisis. And so as I work with people all over the world, I kept seeing that everybody eats and that waistlines are expanding and hospitals are filling up as people are eating more like us. But the American way of producing food, processing food, and consuming food is spreading, whether it's Monsanto and biotechnology, whether it's pesticides and hormones and antibiotics and factory farms, whether it's stripping food of its minerals and vitamins and producing fast food and McDonald's and KFC and Baskin-Robbins. We are spreading like a virus, quite frankly, ways of producing food around the planet, and they're destroying ecosystems and they're destroying lives and they're destroying economies. And so this fire was lit in me that said, hey, if I care about humanity and the future of life on this planet, it's time now to take action. So after 20 years directing the nonprofit, I decided to join with my dad in launching Food Revolution Network to see if we could leverage technology and online technologies to take this to the mainstream. And, you know, we've reached over 1 million people with our online summits. And, you know, we're just getting started, to be honest with you. As you well know, what's at stake is our very lives and the survival of our planet. And so, you know, there's an urgency I feel in this. And there's also a passion and a joy because what we're doing really, truly matters.
You know, it's funny, as you were describing the impact of the American hamburger, or, you know, the American diet, I'm sitting here thinking, I've thought this for a long time, that if when you're served food and it's put on your plate and you have no idea what went into creating that food and how the animals were treated, / like how much processing actually occurred in order to get that food to you. But I think if people had the opportunity to actually take a look at the supply chain from the final product all the way to the beginning product and see not only what happened to that, to, you know, a given food, but also see the environmental impact that is created and the economic impact that's created by just the production of that one piece of food, it would have a drastic effect on the way that people actually eat. And it's not something that most people have any insight into.
Well, it's true. And similarly, if we saw the long-term impact on our lives, I mean, if you had true cost accounting, we would make really different choices. That's true economically because a lot of the costs of the industrialized food system are offloaded to the environment, to future generations. You know, it's cheaper to clear cut than to log sustainably in the short run. It's cheaper to factory farm animals than it is to pasture raise them in the short run. It's cheaper to mass produce, you know, KFC than it is to eat kale in the short run. But in the long run, last time I checked, cancer was pretty expensive. Diabetes was pretty expensive. In the long run, not remembering the names of your loved ones because you're dying of dementia is pretty costly. Carrying excess pounds everywhere you go and feeling like crap is pretty costly. And I know some billionaires who are sick and they would trade all of their wealth for their health. So we live in a society that focuses on short-term gain, short-term gratification, and an accumulation of financial success more than health and love and life itself sometimes. I think it's time to refactor in the equation so that we recognize the fundamental imperative that we have to take a long view with our food choices. You are investing, you are voting with every bite you take in the future for yourself and your life and your loved ones and your planet. And if you want your loved ones to have you around, and if you want to have the vitality to meet the challenges life is going to bring you with the best of what you've got, and if you want a viable world for future generations, then it is time to choose to eat whole foods and whole plant foods and move away from an animal product and refined food-centered diet to what our bodies were designed for.
You know, I can't highlight just how important this is, specifically for the diabetes audience, because so much in the diabetes world, what people do is they focus on only the short-term effect of this meal on my blood glucose 2 hours later. And as a result of that, people with diabetes are driven towards eating a low carbohydrate diet that's got lots of meat, cheese, animal-based foods in general. So they eat foods that are either low in carbohydrate or devoid of carbohydrate, specifically because they're looking for the short-term end result, which is what is my blood glucose going to be 2 to 3 hours from now, as opposed to what's going to happen to me 20, 30, 40 years from now? What's my disease risk going to be at that point? And so, you know, there's lots of doctors out there that, you know, still believe even today that the food you eat has zero effect or very little effect on the outcome of your chronic disease risk, including conditions like diabetes, cancer, hypertension, high cholesterol, just to name a few. But the scientific evidence shows the exact opposite, right?
And let me add on to that, if I might. You know, if you have a bad driving record and you keep getting in accidents, and let's suppose that you stop driving for a year, on paper, you have cleaned up your act. It might look like you're not having accidents, you're not getting tickets, you're dealing with it. But you actually haven't. You're not necessarily a better driver. So if your blood sugar is spiking in response and your insulin response is off balance in response to carbohydrates, specifically complex carbohydrates, then the answer is to, you know, look a little deeper than the short-term symptom. It's not just to stay off the road, although some people need to stay off the road. You know, if you're a bad driver, like freaking get off the road and get in driving school, you know? But in the long game, how do you get to be a good driver? Because your body, when it functions well, will actually be able to work with complex carbohydrates effectively. And I think that, you know, ketogenic diet, for example, is effective at a statistical level in the short term
100%.
because you're staying away from the carbs altogether. But it's not creating the conditions for the long-term health that enables you to effectively metabolize your food in the way your body was designed to do.
Couldn't have said it better. That's fantastic. So give our audience a little bit of insight here into the specific nutrition recommendations that the Food Revolution Network supports and that you advocate that make a true difference in chronic disease risk.
Well, we have today an overwhelming body of data that tells us in no uncertain terms some of the steps we need to take. And let me be clear, there are a lot of diet wars out there, and there are a lot of people who have controversy about their various minutiae. But when you actually look at, not at what the food industry tells us, but and not even government officials, but what like serious researchers recognize when they look at the data, I don't think that modern science is nearly as confused about what human beings should be eating as most of us have been led to believe. The media loves sensation. And if something is new and it throws all the research out the window because everything you thought you knew was wrong, that's going to get eyeballs, and it's going to sell eyeballs for advertisers, quite honestly. But at the end of the day, you know, we have a lot of data. And I think that most serious researchers would agree that we need to eat less sugar and processed carbs and refined foods in general, less bottled oils, less trans fats, obviously, less added sugars, and less white flour and less processed junk. That's number one. Number two, we need to eat less animal products. Now, we could argue till the cows come home, literally, about whether the optimal amount of animal products in the human diet is 0 or 2% or 5%. You know, if we look at the blue zones where people have traditionally lived the longest and healthiest lives, they're typically 0 to 10% animal products, right? But in the United States, we're at 34%. So, you know, I personally think that less meat or no meat is the way to go. And I try to have a Big Ten approach and point in a direction. For a lot of people, it's good to go 100% vegan, you know, and there are a lot of, if you handle your need for omega-3s and B12, you know, and a few other critical nutrients, that can work really well. And whether or not you go totally vegan, less animal products is critically important. And for those who do choose to consume animal products, pasture-raised, wild fish, low mercury are critical because most of the animal products that people are eating today are coming from factory farmed animals that were tortured, that were pumped full of hormones and antibiotics, and that our products have not only immense cruelty and environmental destruction, but that are immensely toxic to human health when they're consumed. So that's my kind of high level. And then I also think it matters where food comes from, like what the sourcing is. And that's where I advocate for going organic if you can, supporting local, supporting fair trade, supporting things that were produced sustainably. You know, get to know your farmers, supporting farmers markets. The community supported agriculture programs are wonderful. Natural foods, you know, it matters where your food comes from and how it was grown and how it was produced, because the toxic food system isn't just out there, it comes home. When your food is grown with pesticides, it doesn't just poison farm workers, which it does, but you're also eating those foods, which are neurotoxins, which are linked to higher rates of cancer and you know, neurological problems and even multi-generational problems sometimes downstream, birth defects and so forth. So I think that it matters. At the end of the day, though, if you can't afford to go organic, don't let that stop you from eating fruits and vegetables. I know one person who was eating an organic donut instead of the non-organic kale because he said he couldn't afford, you know, organic kale. And I was like, no, let's get this clear. You're better off eating the non-organic kale than the organic donut any day of the week. Okay. Let's be really clear about this. So, so I think, you know, if you can go organic, great, but don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Eating lots of vegetables is fabulous. And obviously we need lots of fiber, and that helps in all kinds of ways, your metabolism and your digestion. It feeds the good guys in your gut, the good bacteria. So, I mean, fiber is completely void of any animal products. There is no fiber in any animal products. It's only found in whole plant foods. So I think only 5% of the American public gets the recommended amount of fiber. It's one of the nutrients we are most deficient in. So eat your fiber, eat your greens, eat your whole foods, and you know, you're going to reap the benefits for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's a terrific summary, and it's something we really focus on at Mastering Diabetes and really appreciate about what you guys are doing at Food Network is not focusing on the minutia. You know, the bigger picture. Let's all move in the right direction. Let's celebrate progress. You know, if you can eat organic, eat organic. If you can't, it's okay. Like you said, eat that non-organic kale. You know, make better decisions. And you guys are just doing a fantastic job of promoting that. So beyond just food, what are other aspects of healthy living that make a true impact on disease risk?
Well, there's pretty much the 4 pillars. I mean, when Dan Buettner looked at the blue zones and the healthiest peoples, longest lived peoples in the world in his reports for National Geographic, he identified 4 things that they all had in common. And interestingly, Dr. Dean Ornish, in his groundbreaking research, he was the first person to prove conclusively that lifestyle could not only prevent but also reverse heart disease. He has the same pillars. And interestingly, you know, we have a lot of studies now that back this up. And the 4 pillars are essentially whole foods, plant strong diet, move more. So eat better, move more, like exercise, and generally not just going to the gym once a week to go to a class, but doing things that are built into the fabric of your life, like biking places and going jogging and dancing and playing. And like a lot of people in the blue zones have exercise built into their life, and that's really helpful. But you've got to find things you love that light you up, that bring you joy, not just to check it off your list. Sometimes it starts off as a thing to check off on your list, but eventually your body will love moving. And that's one of the critical things about exercise. And then stress less. We need to do stress reduction, whether it's prayer or meditation or faith background or something else that helps you practice mindfulness. We all have different paths. It doesn't seem to matter clinically that much what the path is, but it really matters that you have something that helps you to attune to your deeper rhythms, to slow down, to calm down, to settle, to and perhaps to connect to a power greater than yourself, if that's how you perceive the world. And then lastly, we need community. We have studies showing us that loneliness can kill more quickly than cigarettes. And it's really true. And it doesn't seem to matter from a statistical standpoint, whether it's a bowling league or a church group or a support group or a, or some other form of social connection, a senior center, a hiking club. Like, the bottom line is, if you have social connections that light you up, that give you a sense of meaning, that give you a sense of belonging, that give you more love in your life, it's good for you. Love is good for you. If doctors could prescribe love, it would probably be more effective than all of the pharmaceuticals in the medical arsenal. Unfortunately, they can't. But the good news is we don't need them to, because we can apply that all on our own, and it doesn't cost a penny. So, move more, stress less, eat better, love more is pretty much the principles. And you get incredible results.
It's funny to hear you say this, actually, because, Dean Ornish has very similar recommendations to you. And we recently interviewed Ty and Charlene Bollinger from The Truth About Cancer. And they also told us that when they went and interviewed a number of physicians in China and I think Japan as well, that many of those physicians told them that 100% of all their cancer patients have some element of hatred or fear or anxiety inside of them that could potentially be fueling the chronic disease process. And, cancer, we know, has a very strong connection to diabetes. There's no question about it. We've heard you talk in the past about angiogenesis. Can you help our audience understand what angiogenesis is and what foods can limit the angiogenic process and reduce the rate at which tumors progress?
Sure. So angiogenesis is essentially the process by which cells receive blood, which they need in order to reproduce and flourish. And normally the body has a really smart ability to feed the good guys and not feed cancer cells. So most of us have cancer cells in our body right now, but our body is capable of cutting off the blood flow to them. Angiogenesis is the feeding process. Anti-angiogenesis is actually the body's kind of immune system, in a sense. It's the body's ability to cut off that blood flow. And a properly working anti-angiogenic system can do just that. But what happens in the case of cancers that proliferate and become dangerous is that they actually kind of mainline their own blood supply, and they veto the body's anti-angiogenic capacities. And they do that with the body kind of falling asleep at the switch. It fails to cut off what it should cut off. So what we're learning is that there are certain foods that are directly linked to the body's native anti-angiogenic capacities, foods that help to help the body do its job and regulate blood flow to cells. And those seem to be the exact same foods that epidemiological studies tell us are linked to lower rates of cancer. So fascinating, right? And it actually seems that anti-angiogenic foods can help not only with prevention, but potentially even with reversal in some cases with cancer. Now, we've always got to be careful when we talk about reversal with cancer. This isn't medical advice. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you don't do chemotherapy. I'm not saying anything about that. You make your own choice. What I am saying is that it might be helpful, and that a lot of times the same things that are good for prevention are also good for reversal. And I think that's pretty hopeful. So, what foods are we talking about? Generally speaking, we're talking about fruits and vegetables. Probably one of the most potent is red grapes. Red wine has been touted for its health benefits, but let's be very clear, it's not the alcohol that's helpful, it's the red grapes that are in there, and even red grape juice may be beneficial. I'm generally not a fan of fruit juice, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. But if you can tolerate it and it works for you, red grape juice may be the one that's most beneficial. But eating red grapes is always better. And then pomegranates are amazing, blueberries, and then all the leafy greens. The usual suspects. How often do we hear, eat your veggies? But you know what? It's true. And let me just bottom line that. We talk about servings and people are like, oh, I had a leaf of kale, like you really want to do more than that. Like think about a bunch or 2 or 3 bunches of kale, daily, or cabbage. Like, it's not just like a leaf of cabbage. Think about like eating a half a cabbage. Like, start to think of veggies as being the main course, the centerpiece of your meal, because the more you can fill up on vegetables, the healthier you will be. And it can be a bit of an acquired taste, and I fully recognize that, but you will acquire it. Your taste buds will change and adapt. So yeah, anti-angiogenic foods, again, it comes back to the same suspects. It's the vegetables, it's the leafy greens, and it's some of the really potent antioxidant rich fruits and veggies that we hear about all the time. And so add them to the list again. And lo and behold, there are no animal products that are particularly anti-angiogenic. So there too, the meat and dairy industry isn't happy about this one, but it's what the data tells us.
So let's talk about the cost difference between these healthy foods you were just talking about and, some packaged foods and getting animal products at McDonald's for, very cheap. A lot of people they're concerned about that. Like, I can't follow this diet. It's too expensive. So is that true? Can you shed some light on that topic?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I don't want to be glib about this. For people who are living paycheck to paycheck, it can be challenging. Not so much to eat healthy food, but to eat healthy food that you like without spending your whole life cooking. I mean, let's be honest that if you don't care about taste too much and you're really flexible, you can eat really simply and really well. It doesn't take a lot of time to cook a pot of beans and cook a cabbage, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. And beans, lentils, even quinoa are pretty affordable. More affordable, even calorie for calorie, than McDonald's. But if you want to get into more tasty things, then it can take a little more time to prepare sometimes. And, unfortunately, most of our processed foods are convenient and they're tasty, and they've hijacked our taste buds, and they've hijacked our economy. So we have a subsidy system in the United States where the U.S. taxpayer is actually subsidizing what we call commodities crops, which are essentially our corn, our soy, our wheat, the big staple crops. And what this ends up doing is bringing down the price of factory farmed animal products, because most of the corn and soy is fed to them. And it's bringing down the price of high fructose corn syrup. And it's bringing down the price of Wonder Bread. And it's, if we took that tens of billions of dollars that we are using to subsidize junk food and we put it towards kale and cabbage and broccoli and the stuff we should be eating more of, nuts and seeds, we would see a totally different economic system, and we would not be essentially penalizing the poor the most for trying to do the right thing. So I am a big advocate for changing the subsidy system. I personally don't know that taxes should be going to subsidize any form of food. I think free market would be better than what we have now. We don't have a free market. It's tilted. But if we are going to subsidize anything, let's subsidize the good stuff. Let's make it easier for everyone to do the right thing. And relatedly, we have a food stamp program also called SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that in the US is largely used in convenience stores, 7-Elevens and so forth, for a lot of junk food. And there are some piloting programs where they give recipients double value for fruits and vegetables, and where they start to accept SNAP at farmers markets. And what we're seeing in communities that have adopted this, and there are about 500,000 Americans right now that have access to this testing, they eat a lot more fruits and vegetables, and their health outcomes improve. So, if we are a society that cares about future generations, if we're a society that cares about the poor having opportunity, if we don't want to foot the bill for higher medical costs because of emergency medicine, because people are so sick, then we ought to invest in preventing this problem in the first place by making it easier for people to do the right thing. So I think there are some basic structural changes we could make that would radically improve the health outcomes for literally millions of people and help to save our economy long term. And that's where I want to see us go. But as an individual, let's suppose you want to eat healthy and you can't change the entire government tax system and you don't have the ability to reverse all this. What can you do? Okay. So number one is get comfortable within your budget with the healthy foods you can afford that are really good for you. And again, legumes, lentils, beans, all that is great. Cabbage, carrots, onions, those are great. Growing food can be great. Getting connected to a CSA, community support agriculture program, can be a good way to invest in a local farmer, and you get a share of their harvest. And often you have to be a little flexible, because if they had a good harvest this week on tomatoes, you're going to get a whole lot of them, but in general, CSAs can be a nice way to get cheaper food. And then share the cooking process with other people. If you're like most of us and you're a little busy and you don't have a ton of time, then cooking for yourself takes a lot longer than cooking for 3 or 4 people. So pool resources. If you live in a big family, that's easier, especially if they eat like you do. But let's suppose they don't, or let's suppose you live alone. Then you find other people who do share your food values. Maybe they're at work, maybe they're in a church group or a local community or a choir. Find some other folks. Raise your hand. Hey, I want to eat healthy food and I want to pool the effort. Who wants to join me, right? You can create a healthy meal swap team. You can, or a co-op or a meal share kind of thing. I'll make dinner on Monday. You make it on Tuesday. We'll share lunch on Tuesday. Whatever it is, you start to get an economy of scale going. And you know what? It's good for your social life, and you'll have more love and connection in your life as well. So I think that the challenge of loneliness and isolation that a lot of us feel in the world right now, that healthy food can actually be a doorway to bridge that gap to building positive social connections and relationships. So those are some of my top tips. And the other thing I want to say is if you are making a radical change in your diet, it's going to take some time to build new habits, but it gets easier and easier. When it rains, the water flows into gullies, and it has its grooves that it likes to go down. And you can change those grooves. Get out there with a shovel and make a new gully, and then the water will all go there in the future. And over time, carve out something like the Grand Canyon. Over time, the grooves get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so my suggestion to you is that if you're thinking about changing your diet and you think it's difficult, just remember it is some work to get out there with that shovel the first time, to develop the habits and the pathways. But the longer you stay with it, the easier it gets.
I never thought about using the transition towards a plant-based diet or eating, more plant-based food as actually being a conduit to having more social interaction. But I think it's actually brilliant the way that you just described it, where you create this economy of sharing, because that's what a lot of businesses are now founded upon. I think it's a really powerful tactic. One question I have for you is tell us what you eat every day. We're all plant eaters, all 3 of us in this room. But I imagine that what you eat on a daily basis is slightly different than what Robbie and I eat. So give us an idea, give our audience some insight.
Well, I'll start with breakfast. So I have a few different approaches to breakfast. And I'll be honest with you, they're not all, pancakes and cereal and things that most people think of as breakfast. And it's certainly not eggs and bacon. So if I want something kind of more traditionally breakfasty, then my 2 favorite go-tos are both made the night before, actually, because I get busy in the morning and I don't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. That's just not my time. My rhythm, I like to spend time in the kitchen in the evening while I'm hanging out with my family. And in the morning, it's like I'm getting off to work. That's my lifestyle. So I'll either soak chia seeds and blueberries and a little maple syrup and vanilla and maybe a little sprinkling of nuts overnight in a kind of blueberry chia soak kind of thing. And then I'll eat that for breakfast. And that's one of my favorites. Oh, soaked in unsweetened soy milk. That's just my thing. I know soy is controversial to some. I think unsweetened soy milk can be pretty healthy. So I'm getting an abundance of omega-3 fatty acids. I'm getting a huge amount of fiber. I'm getting lots of protein, and I'm getting blueberries, which are just amazing antioxidant-rich powerhouses. And it tastes pretty darn good. You have to chew well if you're going to eat chia seeds that haven't been ground up. But soaking them helps a lot. And then sometimes I'll also do an oat soak. So I like to take oats and actually soak them also again in unsweetened soy milk, or you can use almond milk or another kind of nut milk. And some blueberries, maybe some raisins in this case. I know not everyone who's dealing with diabetes wants to do raisins, but for me, they're fine. And some cinnamon and allspice and nutmeg, maybe some other spices, maybe a little vanilla. And soak that overnight with some nuts. And I'll sometimes add some ground chia or flaxseed to that as well, often adding that in the morning because it'll soak up otherwise the liquid. But those are my more traditional breakfasts. But to be honest with you, I often eat leftovers. And that might sound strange. I hope it doesn't sound gross, but if dinner was really good, then, why not? So I'll often eat, I don't see anything wrong with eating some vegetables, some quinoa, some, legumes even as part of breakfast. It works for me. And you know, we often mix and match. We'll have big staples in the fridge. Like right now, we got some kale that's steamed up, and we've got some quinoa, and we've got some legumes, a couple different lentils, and you know, pinto beans, and they're all cooked up in the fridge in different containers. And then we'll mix different combinations, maybe some cabbage, and stick some avocado in there, chop some chopped nuts, different mixes, different spices. I love spices. You know, the American diet, we pretty much make salt, sugar, and fat the main flavor additives of our cuisine. But around the world, it's spices that are part of what makes culture so rich when it comes to food. And so I love spices, and it turns out they're incredibly potent sources of antioxidants and all kinds of wonderful nutrients. So so I love spices, some hot, you know, I'm learning to love hot, you know, peppers and stuff. But I also love, so we have lots of different sauces that we keep in the fridge, or different kinds of spice mixes, and that's the easiest. Sometimes I'll also add some, you know, dry herbs and shake it in there. And I just get creative and throw things together in a container and take it off to work with me. So that's sometimes breakfast and lunch. There's a couple really different combinations of those kinds of things. You know, sometimes I'll do a tofu scramble or something, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not often up for making that stuff in the morning. And then dinner is where I kind of get more creative and, you know, spend some time with the family. And we often have a nice salad. We do a dip salad. This is unusual, but it's kind of a family tradition. We have a nice homemade salad dressing that's rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and raw onion and raw garlic and nutritional yeast, and some soy sauce and fresh lemon juice, and mix all that together. And then we will wash lettuce, tomatoes, maybe some avocado, cucumbers, and whole lettuce leaf. And you put a bowl with some dressing in it, and you dip it in there. And you know, you get just the perfect amount of dressing for each bite. And our family just goes through lettuce by the truckload. I mean, we'll eat you know, several heads of lettuce in one sitting sometimes, because it's so delicious. And you know, I just love that. And sometimes we'll make more fancy chopped salads, but the dip salad is kind of our old standby, and it's awfully convenient because you just wash the stuff and it's ready to go. So that, you know, and then, you know, obviously I'll enjoy some greens with dinner as well, straight up, and then some kind of more rich source of calories, you know, legumes and or grains. I made a nut loaf recently that was amazing. You know, it's fun to play. For dessert, my favorite dessert is frozen bananas and berries that are blended up in the blender, maybe with a little bit of soy milk, or you can put them through a Champion juicer. But we have a Vitamix, and I love to just blend that up, maybe with a little vanilla or allspice, depending on the kind of direction you want to take it. And you end up with this really tasty treat, and our kids love it, and it's pretty healthy.
This all makes perfect sense. Now I know exactly why you're so vibrant. You have so much energy, so well spoken. That is amazing, amazing. So our last question for you today is, what do you think is the number one obstacle that people run into when they try and change their life and live a healthier lifestyle? And what would you recommend to overcome that obstacle?
Apathy is the thief of destiny. And we see this again and again, you know, that we get caught in our ruts and our status quo and what's familiar. And typically the older we get, the more entrenched our habits are. There's the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, you know what? Don't be an old dog then. Because the standard American diet leads to the standard American diseases. And if you continue on the path of least resistance that's been pre-created for you, you're going to end up, you know, where most people end up. And, you know, we're here to say something better is possible. So the time is now to take massive action. It's not time to make a bad thing a little bit less bad. It's time to fundamentally rethink our relationship with food so that it becomes a tool to support health. And when we do that, our bodies will thank us for the rest of our lives. So the key is momentum. You don't want to make the perfect into the enemy of the good. You don't have to nail it all out of the gate, but get started. You can eliminate the 3 worst offenders in your kitchen. You can make a red line. I'm not going to eat any more sugar. I'm not going to eat any more meat. I'm not going to eat any more white flour products. I'm going to make most of my meals at home. You could say that I'm going to stop, you know, pigging out on, burgers at fast food restaurants. You can say that I'm going to eat more vegetables. I'm going to crowd out the bad stuff with the good stuff. I'm going to eat a head of cabbage every other day. You can make commitments like this and just build it into your life and stick with it, whatever it is for you. I think that there's no universal formula for where to start or what to do. That what really matters most is that you start and that you do. And now that you know, it's time to put what you know into action. At the end of the day, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, they don't care a heck of a lot how much you know. They don't care how many summits you've attended or how many books you've read, but they do care what you eat and how you live. So the whole point of us being here right now is to help you to apply what you're learning and get the results that you deserve. And I'm telling you, they'll be there. It's not theory. It's reality. It's science. When you feed your body the right things, when you learn to love foods that love you back, your world changes.
I love how you're talking about a simple, actionable items there. That's really great. So before we go, can you tell us about your new book?
I would love to. I am so excited about my new book, 31-Day Food Revolution. Heal your body, feel great, and transform your world. So there's a few things that make this book totally unique. It's aligned with all the stuff we're talking about here today, but here's what makes it unique. Number one, there's obviously an interesting family story, and we weave a lot of our family story through the book. And with our over 500,000 members, we've been asking folks to share their stories and how they apply healthy eating. So there's a lot of really original creative stories in the book. Number two, it's all rooted in action. There are 31 chapters in this book, and my thesis is that 31 steps to health will bring you more satisfaction even than 31 flavors of ice cream. So there's 31 chapters in the book. Every chapter ends with action steps you can take to apply what you're learning so you can get the results that you want. And then also this book has 4 parts: detoxify, nourish, gather, and transform. So it takes you on a journey, how to get rid of the bad stuff, how to say yes to the good stuff, how to gather your tribe, your community, your social relationships, so you have that love and that support network that'll help you persevere and sustain and love your healthy eating path. And then how do you change the world? We've got to put our own oxygen masks on first before helping others. And then we've got to save the freaking plane, because we live in a toxic food culture and we need to make some changes. And so this will show you how simply, easily, you can be a part of the revolution and you can change our food systems for the better, because ultimately we all have a stake in the game. So let's live it. Let's change it. Let's make a world that works.
Ocean, thank you so much for A, making the time to be here with us today, B, doing what you do, putting so much care, so much love, so much attention into teaching people around the world, and for being a fearless leader in this revolution towards eliminating a toxic food environment. I've been following your work for 4 or 5 years at this point, watch every Food Revolution Summit, and read every single article that you publish on the Food Revolution Network website. And I think it's phenomenal. I really appreciate all the hard work that you and your team put into this. And if we haven't said so already, we really appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for making this summit possible, for creating it, for all the work. I know there's a lot of work that goes into this, and everybody watching right now, this didn't just happen today. These guys have been working for like months and years to make this happen and to pull this community together, all because they care about you. So use it. And that's what it's for. And bless you.